We're going to be talking about Daniel today. And let's see where we're going to be here. Okay, so I'm going to do this in a way where I'm more facilitating a discussion. So without Ryan jumping right to the bat, what do we know about Daniel?
He fought the lions.
Yeah, very well, yeah. Yeah, he did that. But I guess more specifically, where did Daniel come from, I guess?
Well, he was from Israel, from Jerusalem. He was captured and taken to Babylon.
Right?
He was the first round of captivity for Babylon.
Yep. And he was from the tribe of...
I don't know that one.
Judah, it ought to be anyway.
Yes, it is.
All right, good.
Thanks for giving him a chance, Ryan.
Well, that's why I don't know that.
So, but yes, he was taken into the captivity by the Babylonians, and he was, as Sarah said, the first round of captives taken under captivity by King
Nebuchadnezzar.
Thank you, Betty.
Wow.
She
It doesn't
spell
say
it.
that he was
I was being
Say
quiet.
again?
You
He
spell
was
it.
probably a eunuch.
That was your whisper.
Doesn't really,
That I don't.
it doesn't say. It
That
say.
doesn't. I don't think is
What was the question?
fleshed out.
Jerry
thought-
eunuch.
Oh,
I don't think. That,
probably not.
I don't know.
I don't think that it's spelled out as far as such. So, but anywho, basic timeline of the events of kind of leading up to captivity. I have some dates, and BC is always weird to me because the numbers get smaller. So like I thought I had a freak out moment here where I thought my list was backwards, but it's not. We're good. So around 609 BC, Babylon captures Judah, and about 605, the first group of Jewish captives is taken to Babylon, including Daniel. About 597, the second group is taken into captivity, including Ezekiel. 586, the third set. 539, Babylon falls to Persia. 539, Cyrus allows Jews to return to the homeland of Jerusalem. 457, the second wave of return led by Ezra. 444, the third wave returns led by Sarah's favorite. Right? No, never mind. Nehemiah. What's your favorite book?
Esther.
Anywho. So I'm going to go ahead and start reading and working our way through Daniel. We're not going to finish today, and that's all right. So in the first two verses of Daniel, we read, "The third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. The Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with some of the vessels of the house of God, and he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and placed the vessels in the treasury of his God." And Sarah and I were talking about this last night, and I don't know what those vessels were. Does anyone have any insight on that?
So, what he took was some of the stuff from the temple, some of the instruments of worship from the temple that were used for various purposes.
Okay.
And it was actually prophesied because his Jehoiakim's great-grandfather, I think it was Jehoshaphat, no, Hezekiah. Hezekiah was a good king, got arrogant at the end of his rule, and when the ambassadors from Babylon came, he took them and showed them all the things he was so proud of, particularly all those things in the temple that were all gold and everything, and they're like, wow, that's really nice. So when they came back, they took them. So.
Huh. Okay. Well, there's that. Thanks, Ryan. So,
Where are you reading again?
Daniel, first two verses.
First two verses.
Yes.
What I was talking about was from 2 Kings.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. So then, in moving on in verse verses 3 and 4. Then the king commanded Ashpenaz, his chief eunuch, to bring some of the people of Israel, both the royal family and of the nobility, youths without blemish, of good appearance and skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge, understanding, learning, and competent to stand in the king's palace, and to teach them the literature and language of the Chaldeans. Now, this may seem like a bit of a jump, and I remember when I first put this lesson together quite some time ago, this reminded me of how the great, not as in good, but great as in big dictators and violent overthrows of different countries in modern times kind of happened. So it made me think of Hitler, actually, because what did he do? The very first thing he did is he disarmed people, but then he rounded up all of the scientists and the artists and the intellectuals and kind of said, hey, you're either with me or you're not. Right. And so, and then once they learned, once those people, the popular people, I guess, went over to that side, the rest of the, I guess we can call them the Chaldeans in this instance, the rest wanted to be like them. So what are your guys' thoughts on that?
What it reminds me of is the attempt by the government to indoctrinate the Indians. And they put them into boarding schools and tried to make them American citizens or United States citizens rather than Indians. That's what comes to my mind when I read this, trying to make them Chaldeans. They were trying to make the Indians civilized, they said.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I was going to say, it sounds like he took the royal family, they did, and then they took groups that they handpicked, and so, and they're slaves, literally, but they're being treated good.
Yes.
Halfway good. So that tells you that they don't want no inner turmoil from their slaves. So what they were doing was something like that. They would bring, and they did that, it sounded like through all of these different things, let them still do their religion somewhat and do all these things and try to keep them pacified or at least happy. But they were still slaves, but they kind of kept them where they're moderately happy in their slavery.
Yeah, see guys, it's not so bad.
Yeah.
Kind of a deal.
Yeah.
I know, I agree with you on that one. Anyone? Yeah, go ahead.
And this is actually part of, there's a sort of long tradition that goes way, way, way back in history of taking hostages, basically, from the royal family when you capture another country. Once larger empires began to develop, it became obvious that if you're going to have a larger empire, you cannot constantly be having to put down rebellions, and you can't constantly have an entire army stationed everywhere you want to be in control of, or you'll end up it'll either cost you way too much or it just gets out of control. And so the idea was that you go into these smaller kingdoms and you take hostages, and you don't treat treat them like a Hamas guy would treat hostages. Now they're more it's like guaranteeing the good behavior of the government you leave behind, because in the case of the Israelites, just like most of Babylon's other client states, they actually left their kings intact, or at least ones that they were okay with. They let them stay on the throne. So these hostages are designed in part to guarantee the good behavior of the kings and the people who are running the government from there on. But also then, you've taken away some of the best, and so now they're over with you, and you can benefit from what they know, and they can hopefully benefit from what you know. And part of the idea by the time you get to the Babylonians is it's gotten a little more advanced, is now we can actually get stronger because of what's good about you guys. And then hopefully that will help to create people who are happy back home because they see you guys doing well, and so everybody's okay. And it worked a lot of times with most of the people for most of these empires that they took possession of. So
yeah, it seems like actually a pretty effective, or a very effective way of doing things. And maybe I kind of got ahead of myself, but you guys kind of got to the next point. So in verses 5 through 7, it says, the king assigned them a daily portion of food that the king ate and the wine that he drank. They were to be educated for 3 years, and at the end of that time, they were to stand before the king. Among these were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah of the tribe of Judah. And the chief of the eunuchs gave them new names. Daniel he called, say it.
Belteshazzar.
Okay. Hananiah he called Shadrach, Mishael he called Meshach, and Azariah he called Abednego. And so, as you guys were just saying, we can read here that the king's actively trying to gain favor with his captives through food and drink. He gave them the best, treated them like kings themselves in an attempt to make them think that it's maybe not so bad here, right? And then they were to be educated for 3 years in the way of Chaldeans, in the way of the Chaldeans. And I wonder what that was like. Was it to kind of remove their Jewish identity but make them think that it wasn't so bad, or maybe pull the wool over their eyes so they didn't notice that it was actually happening? What do you guys think?
I think it's actually less sinister than that. If you look at alternative translations, the New American Standard, I'm not sure which one you're reading from. New American
ESV.
Standard, what's that?
ESV.
ESV. The New American Standard actually says that he appointed them from the daily ration and from the wine, and appointed that they should be educated 3 years, at the end of which they were to enter the king's personal service. So stand before the king isn't just like they brought him in and like, all right, he passes, he looks like he's still, been fed, and he doesn't look like he's an idiot, so good job, and take him out.
Mm-hmm.
The job was for them to eventually come into the service of the king, and as we see with Daniel as well as with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, one of the reasons they got in trouble because of that whole, or the three of them especially, because of that whole not bowing down to the golden idol thing, is because they were servants of the king, government officials. Those were the people he called there to worship that idol. There's probably an element of educating them about the gods of the Babylonians and stuff. But the bigger thing is, if you're going to give people control over parts of your empire, they better know how you do things and like how it runs, and they better understand the philosophy and math and things like that. That the Israelites, I mean, when you look at the Israelites, they would have been considered significantly backwoods folks by the people who ran Babylon in terms of the education and the art and literature and some of that kind of stuff. And so the idea is we're going to get them up to the level where they can now operate in our environment, and they know our laws and they know how to do our stuff. And yeah, like I said, I'm sure there's an element of, here's why our culture is better and here's why our religion is better and stuff like that. But that's not the only thing. That's not even the main thing probably. It's this other stuff that's even more important.
That's a good point, man. Thank you.
I got a quick question.
Yeah.
Ryan, when they say the Chaldeans, Ryan, is
Yes.
that culture?
Yes, the Chaldean thing is actually a big term thing for the Babylonians, and later for the Medes and the Persians are also Chaldeans. It's all from a region like that, which is why it's so easy to transition between those different governments when that happens.
All right. Does anyone have anything else before we?
I was just thinking, if you're going to work for Trump, you got to know what you want.
That's right.
Well, I mean, same with like, whenever you meet foreign dignitaries, there's things that you do and do not want to do. That can be offensive or uplifting to them. And so, yes, and I think just some of the little tweaks, that if you were willing to do that, now you should be willing to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And then it could eventually have led to being more sinister, but I don't think that's how it started out. Yeah, let's get them up to speed.
Mm-hmm.
These backwoods people who only have one God,
Yeah.
let's get them up to speed. Make sure they know our language, then whenever we bring the other people over, they'll see how these people have prospered and want to be like them and get them up to speed. But then I think my allergies are bad and I didn't quite hear Jerry's eunuch question. But in Isaiah 39:7, it talks about some of the sons being taken and being eunuchs over to the king of Babylon. And that might have been after the 3 years, whenever they were to enter the king's service. But then, because I can't picture that being a award-winning argument at the very beginning.
Yeah.
Come on, guys.
By the way,
Yeah.
Good news.
I just want to keep everyone happy, so.
But look how tasty the food is.
Right? I mean, they renamed them, right? right? So just
Right.
losing a little bit of yourself along the way.
Kind of
after
just
3
chipping
years.
away at at their identity is kind of what you're saying.
Yeah.
I find it interesting that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, it's how we've heard those three all the time, and yet somehow Daniel doesn't get referred to as Belteshazzar all the time. He's got his book
It's
name
too
after
much.
him, Daniel, and not after, it's not called the book of Belteshazzar, you know? It's kind of like somehow he get to keep his name from the standpoint of the way history remembers him, and the other three didn't, even though in many ways they have the more significant aspect of standing up to the culture in terms of not bowing down to the golden image, but somehow they got the short end of that one, so.
Well, he had too many syllables.
I barely, it's hard to pronounce them, the other guys.
But
So-
I mean, if we talk about 3 years here and kind of chipping away at the identity, but then you think about the generations that came to, not my favorite book, Nehemiah, going back to rebuilding Jerusalem, right? But then Esther, my favorite, where she's having to,
That's the girl, right?
that's the girl, where,
That's Ruth you're thinking.
so she has to like, she kind of, like, she knows about God, but it's not something that is prevalent, right? She's under a different empire. And so she has to appeal to the king and be like, well, this, you know, and because of this, like, they are targeting the Jews, right? Like, it hadn't actually been kind of a thing. It's just, I don't know,
Yeah, that's a good point.
in just a couple generations.
Mm-hmm. So, I guess, moving on to verse 8. But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. Therefore he asked that the chief of the eunuchs to allow him to not defile himself. That seems like a pretty hard line in the sand, that there's really, that I'm reading here, there's no like bargaining back and forth. Daniel kind of just said no. So what do you guys think about all that?
Well, you didn't ask permission. I mean, that's kind of nice, right?
Yeah.
Listen, I don't want to defile myself. Is that okay with you? Because otherwise I'm going to starve to death. So
Yeah.
it's up to you.
What do you suppose that the food was that was unclean that Daniel wasn't going to eat? Suppose they served lobster or pork or?
I just think to me it says that, like, not necessarily clean versus unclean. To me here, the overarching idea is decadent,
Oh, okay, that might be, yeah.
right? He like, not that the food was bad or the wine was bad, but just that it was
Gluttonous?
gluttonous. Yeah.
It's also possible that it was stuff that there was a high likelihood it had been sacrificed to idols before it was provided.
Yeah, that's true too. Yeah.
Because that was pretty much the standard thing for this kind of stuff, and as we'll see with the food he chooses later, that's the kind of stuff that that would almost certainly not have been sacrificed to idols, so he could be confident that it was okay to eat it without offending God, basically.
Right. So what did he want for food instead?
Yeah, somebody else.
Yeah,
So
that's something else, yeah.
they ended up doing veggies and water, but, so to me, I think that's more where Jerry's going, where there was some kind of meat that was being offered, some kind of protein source that either was offered to idols or was considered unclean under the law. But everyone else is thinking, well, I better eat this to keep my strength up, even though it defiles God. Our justification in that.
Right. So, let's see here. So, it says that in verse 12, it says, "Test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables and to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance and the appearance of the youths who eat the king's food be observed by you, and deal with your servants according to what you see." So he listened to them in this matter and tested them for 10 days. And at the end of 10 days, it was seen that they were better in appearance and fatter in flesh than all the youths who ate the king's food. So the steward took away their food and the wine that they were to drink and gave the rest of them vegetables. That to me, so I have a note in here. It says vegetables don't really make you fat unless they're potatoes and you fry them. So it was actually fairly risky because if it didn't work, then they were really in some serious trouble, and they did it anyway because they knew it was right and it was worth the risk. But I gotta think that that their faith in God had a big part in this. There's really no other way to explain that. So
I was going to say that because at the very start of all this, it says that God, said it was okay. So he's watching over them, even though he had allowed them to be taken into captivity, or at least part of them. He's still watching over the ones that are trying to still serve him.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it sounds like, it may be just vegetables, but God's taking care of them. So
Yeah.
I think God is sustaining them
Yeah.
because these are his true servants still.
Mm-hmm.
And no matter what, they're there saying, hey, I can't eat this meat because of this, because God says I'm not supposed to. And so he's going to watch over them. And that's, here in this terrible land, they're just eating vegetables and water. Most of us, I would die. Without a doubt.
I think a lot of us would be in trouble here.
Yeah, but here I think God's taking care of them.
Absolutely, yeah. It's and so yeah, he's making them healthy. He's he's guiding them through his plan of things, and it's really neat to see. Yes, sir.
So, in my daily Bible reading, and I can't find it right now, I think it's at the first part of Numbers, it talks about how the tribe of Levi, and I think it's actually specific lineage of Levi, they're not supposed to have grapes at all. They can't eat the fruit, they can't drink the wine, they can't, no grape. And so I would have to think that maybe some of the Levites came over to just not make Judah as strong with the religion, with this. And so by having the wine, they're actually breaking even more of the rules that God set in place if they are Levites, which Daniel's from Judah, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Wasn't that the Nazarite vow?
There
There is
is
that too. But she's talking. There is something else. I want to say it's the Kohathites, maybe.
I want to say it was, yeah, but I couldn't find it, so I didn't want to say it.
But there's the idea, I think, though, that I get back to, and this is actually a text note. I didn't come up with this on my own, but is that when you look at the sacrifices that were made in the temple, meat was sacrificed. Obviously, a lot of animals were sacrificed, but also one of the most common other ones was a wine and oil sacrifices. So I'm thinking that this is probably tied into the idea. For example, think about in the first century, for the Christians, they're having a problem because some of the Christians, the Gentile Christians, are eating meat and they're not really checking to see whether it was sacrificed to idol or anything else. And some of the Jewish Christians in other cities won't eat meat at all because they don't know if it's sacrificed to idols or not. And I think that it may be as simple as just Daniel is taking the position that since there's no way to know, I don't want to do this. And so these things that might have been sacrificed to idols, whereas the things he's asking for, he knows will not have been sacrificed to idols. Nobody does water as a sacrifice to idols. Nobody does vegetables, not just like raw vegetables kind of a thing. So he feels, I think, maybe more certain that he can eat that safely or something. And so that may be a big, I remember growing up, my mom used this as like a justification why it was important to eat healthy. Looking back on that, I feel like either she didn't understand the scriptures as well as I thought she did, or she was just, taking advantage of the fact that I didn't understand the scriptures as well as I do now. But either way, I think it's less about the purely healthy aspect of it than it is this concern about what has been done to this meat, what has been done to this wine, especially if it's being served in the king's palace, where since religion and theocracy are or religion and kingship are so closely entwined, there's such a high likelihood that there's an element of idolatry going on as a function of the food that we're being given. So I think that's probably the biggest concern.
Thank you, Ryan. Betty?
I kind of think that God probably made sure that they got, what vegetables they got was the proper nutrients for their bodies.
Mm-hmm.
There was probably, maybe some nuts and things that had protein, because you think of vegetables, well, there's hardly any protein in most of them. But I'm sure he made sure that they got everything they needed so they would be healthy and serve him. We
Yeah,
don't know
and-
about all that, but
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I guess to your point, realistically speaking, I think their faith was the reason that whether it was celery or carrots or
That's not-
almonds.
or almonds or whatever, I think it was their faith that gave them the sustenance that they needed. I think that they were awarded.
Probably a combination.
Yeah, and I think that it's you can really see God directly intervening.
Yeah.
All throughout the Old Testament, I guess more so than the New Testament, but you can, especially in this instance right here, but when we, as we go further into chapter 1 here, he keeps intervening very, very, very directly. But yes, thank you, Betty. Mark?
I was gonna say too, in the Old Testament, they were told, through whoever was leading them in God, how to prepare their meats, especially the blood part of it. And
Yeah.
blood was a big thing, and
Yeah.
you gotta know that you're in a completely different country. They're gonna prepare their meats how they do it,
Mm-hmm.
and it was probably no big deal for them,
Right.
to eat these animals, and here they haven't been prepared correctly and all the things that God had told them to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so here's Daniel in that same thing saying, hey, like Ryan was saying, I don't know how you even prepared any of this. So I'm just gonna keep myself as clean as I can.
Yeah.
And let God take care of me. And that's pretty much it. Like you said, I think a lot of this is faith-based,
Mhm.
Yeah.
a lot of it.
Yeah, agreed. Jerry, did you have something? Okay, sorry, I thought I saw you. Go ahead, Sue.
So is it the new covenant that made it so that we no longer have to worry about that?
I think so, yeah.
Because that was a function of the law of Moses, and we're not under the law of Moses.
Really, yeah, dumpster's good. Really makes things a lot less complicated. So, if there's nothing else, go ahead, see.
The impression I get out of this is it's one of those things that's sort of like miraculous.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not so much what vegetables they were or that they got fatter. I think that was Daniel faithfully, as best he could, obeying God, and God using the opportunity to show the Babylonians, the Chaldeans, that he is powerful. Because right now, Daniel and the rest and all those that are captured are just a conquered people. They're enslaved or whatever, and where's your God now kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is God demonstrating, hey, you present to them what you feel is the best of the best food, and here they're saying, we don't want that, could you give us something that you anticipate will be a much more inferior nutritionally thing, and it turns out it's better. And they themselves are like shocked by that. They're like, well, there must be something more to it than just the vegetables.
Which, again, revisiting that part was pretty gutsy because, like, this guy's not just the owner of a high-end steakhouse, he's the king, right? And so how offended would, like, when my kids want to put ketchup on my brisket?
I've been there, close by it.
Yeah, and so, right?
With my kids here.
It's like,
It's brisket. You're supposed to have ketchup on it, right?
You want to leave now.
King Nebuchadnezzar had the power to just snap his fingers and send them straight to whatever method of torture or execution he had. And so,
Well, not just those four, the chief eunuch.
That's
We're
right.
allowing them
yeah,
to do that.
exactly. So there was a lot of, again, direct intervention from God and a lot of faith, but I don't think that we can overlook the courage
Yeah.
either.
But there's also an element of wisdom in this too, because they only ask
Yes.
for 10 days. 10 days is enough time that if things start to go off the rails, you can probably get them back on again, you know?
Mhm.
So they're saying to him, just give us 10 days. If it's not looking good after 10 days, we'll go back to your way of doing it. And so there is that wisdom, we're gonna see more about that in a little bit here, that they're asking for something that is, it may be a little risky, but it's not as risky as saying, you know, give us the year, you know,
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah, or just no forever.
Yeah,
kind of deal,
exactly. Yeah.
Sarah?
Well, and I think it shows the power of one, because I mean, I know the other three did the same thing, but Daniel appears asked for that, right? So the power of one person making one choice and not, and living by example, I guess is what I'm trying to say. He didn't have to say anything else. He was waiting for someone to ask him why. Well, because of my God,
Right,
this is why.
that's a good point. Okay, moving on. In verse 17 we read, "As for these 4 youths, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams." Which is pretty amazing. In just 3 years, he learned an entire culture, which is incredible. So not only did God make them healthy on vegetables, he gave them the ability to very nearly perfect the Chaldean way of life with one very major point, without sacrificing their faith, without sacrificing their belief. Right? So they found favor in King Nebuchadnezzar's sight without doing things totally his way. Daniel was even given the ability, as we saw in verse 17, to interpret visions and dreams, which, I don't know about you guys, but that sounds like a responsibility I wouldn't want, because in the event he interprets one in a way that the king doesn't like, things can get dicey. So through that one choice of not defiling themselves with food and drink, God blessed them with a spot in the king's court, which is very amazing since they were foreigners and they were slaves. So to kind of wrap up chapter 1 here, I had some questions that I wrote down, and one of them is, how do we achieve favor in God's eyes as modern day Christians? Right? Is it eating our vegetables? Yeah, man, I wish they were here today. Is it get captured, or is it make an active choice every day to not defile ourselves? I'm going to open that up to you guys. Jerry?
I think it's like Sarah mentioned, it's a one-person thing, it's an individual thing. Now, these other 3 guys were apparently in agreement with Daniel, but the scripture talks about his action.
Mm-hmm.
And like Sarah says, it's a one-person thing. We are responsible to God individually. Not what you do, not what Ryan does, not what Sarah does, but what I do. And that, you know, that seems to me a big part of the overall picture of what's happening to Daniel here.
I agree.
Of course, it's also Daniel writing the book, so it's possible that he may have sort of slanted things a little bit. And I, Daniel, wrote.
It's kind of like when John calls himself the apostles that Jesus loved the most.
Yes.
Yeah. Sure.
There you are, you know.
Mark?
I was gonna say, just like them, we're strangers in this land. That's the way we gotta look at ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
We can't be part of this world, we live in it, but we have to show our faith. We've got to stand up when it's right to stand up. We've got to do those things that God expects of us. And I think it's the same thing here. Daniel stood up and said, look, I can't do this.
Mm-hmm.
And God took care of him for it. And just like us, he's going to take care of us, but he expects us to do the right thing also. We can't just bend to the world.
Absolutely.
And we've got to stand up to it and say, hey, we are the shining example. here, not the world. And so
Right.
I think, you know, that's what God says, you're just strangers in a strange land.
Mhm.
This isn't your place, this isn't your home. You're looking forward to the lot better. And so I think we can take that out like what Daniel is here.
Yeah.
He's staying with God. No matter what happens to him, through this whole book, he sticks with God and he's taken care of because of it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you. And to amend it just a little bit, if I can, his attitude wasn't "I can't." His attitude was "I won't," because this is why. And
Yeah.
that's and the courage it must have taken for him to do that versus like what we're facing with. It seems a lot more piddly, like what we're facing now, you know, and how often we don't do that. So yeah, thank you, Mark. Steve.
Well, and Daniel knew who was in charge, God.
Mm-hmm.
And Daniel submitted to who was in charge. And so later in chapter 2 here, he's quoting, I think, from Psalms, but he says, let the name of God be blessed forever and ever. And he says, and it is he who changes the times and the epochs. He removes kings and establishes kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the men of understanding. It is he who reveals the profound and hidden things. Daniel knew who the boss was, and he submitted to that and was able, through the situation that he was in, to proclaim that. And we can do that today as Christians, no matter what our situation is, we can still proclaim who's in charge.
Yeah, I think we're expected to. Yep. Thank you. Well, that's about all I got for chapter 1. I don't think that we have the time to get into chapter 2. So thank you guys. I appreciate it.